Marcus wiped his sweaty palms on his worn jeans as he stepped through the massive oak doors of Whitmore Academy. The building looked like a castle from the movies he used to watch at the group home. Everything was shiny and perfect. The floors were so clean he could see his reflection in them. He carried his small backpack with his only good shirt inside. Mrs. Chun from Social Services had told him this was his big chance. The piano competition at Whitmore Academy was famous. The winner would get a full scholarship to study music at any college they wanted. Marcus had been playing piano since he was 7 years old. He learned on an old keyboard at the community center. It had missing keys and made strange sounds, but Marcus loved it anyway. Music was the only thing that made him forget about being alone in the world. The other kids at Whitmore Academy looked different from Marcus. They wore expensive clothes and carried leather bags. Their shoes were shiny and new. Marcus looked down at his old sneakers with holes in them. He felt very small in this big fancy place. A tall woman with perfect hair walked up to him. She wore a blue suit that probably cost more than Marcus had ever seen in his life. Her smile looked fake, like the plastic smiles on dolls. "You must be Marcus," she said in a voice that sounded sweet but felt cold. "I'm Mrs. Wellington, the music director. We're so excited to have you here today." Marcus nodded and tried to smile back. Something about her made him feel uncomfortable, but he could not figure out what it was. "Follow me," Mrs. Wellington said. "I'll show you where you'll be practicing before the competition." They walked down a long hallway filled with paintings of serious-looking people in old clothes. Marcus wondered if they were all rich people who had gone to this school long ago. The walls were covered in gold frames and fancy decorations. Other students passed them in the hallway. They whispered to each other and stared at Marcus. He heard one girl giggle and say something about his clothes. His face turned red, but he kept walking. Mrs. Wellington stopped in front of a door at the end of the hallway. "Here's your practice room," she said, opening the door with a big smile. Marcus stepped inside and his heart sank. In the middle of the small room sat the most terrible piano he had ever seen. The wood was old and cracked. Several keys were missing completely. The bench was wobbly and covered in dust. It looked like something that belonged in a junkyard, not a fancy music school. "Is this a joke?" Marcus asked quietly. Mrs. Wellington's fake smile got even bigger. "Oh no, dear. This is a very special piano. It has so much character. I thought it would be perfect for someone with your background." Marcus felt his stomach twist. He understood what she meant. This broken piano was for the poor foster kid? The real pianos were probably for the rich students who belonged here. "Where do the other students practice?" he asked. "Oh, they have their own practice rooms upstairs," Mrs. Wellington said, waving her hand like it did not matter. "But don't worry about that. I'm sure you'll do just fine with this one. After all, you're probably used to simpler instruments." Marcus wanted to run away. He wanted to grab his backpack and walk right out of this mean place, but then he remembered Mrs. Chun's words. This was his chance to change his life. This competition could give him a real future. He sat down on the wobbly bench and pressed one of the working keys. The sound was awful. It was out of tune and made a sad, broken noise. But Marcus had dealt with broken things his whole life. He could work with this. "I'll practice here," he said firmly. Mrs. Wellington looked surprised, like she expected him to give up. "Well, all right then. The competition starts in 3 hours. Good luck." She left the room and closed the door behind her. Marcus heard her laughing with someone in the hallway. He tried not to think about what they were saying. Marcus opened his backpack and took out his sheet music. He had been practicing the same piece for months. It was a beautiful song by Chopin that told a story of hope and dreams. When he played it on the community center keyboard, it made him feel like he could fly. He placed the music on the broken piano and started to play. The sound was terrible, but Marcus closed his eyes and imagined the beautiful music in his head. His fingers knew every note by heart. Even on this awful piano, he could feel the music flowing through him. For the next 2 hours, Marcus practiced on the broken piano. Some keys did not work at all, so he had to change parts of the song. Other keys made horrible sounds, but he learned to work around them. It was like solving a puzzle. Students walked by the practice room and peeked through the window. They pointed and laughed at the broken piano. Marcus tried to ignore them, but their laughter hurt his feelings. One boy with perfect blonde hair pressed his face against the window and made funny faces. His friends thought this was very amusing. Marcus kept playing, but his hands started to shake a little. A girl in an expensive dress took pictures of Marcus with her phone. She was probably going to show her friends the poor boy playing the junk piano. Marcus felt his face get hot with embarrassment, but he did not stop playing. Mrs. Wellington came back to check on him. She brought some other adults with her. They all wore fancy clothes and had satisfied looks on their faces, like they were watching something entertaining. "How's it going?" Mrs. Wellington asked in her fake sweet voice. "Fine," Marcus said, not looking up from the piano. "Wonderful." "I'm sure this will be a very memorable performance," she said. The adults with her started giggling. Marcus realized they were all in on the joke. They had given him this broken piano on purpose. They wanted to watch him fail in front of everyone. They thought it would be funny to see the poor foster kid try to play beautiful music on a piece of junk, but Marcus had something they did not expect. He had been broken before, just like this piano. And just like this piano, he was still here. He was still making music, even when everything was falling apart. He looked up at Mrs. Wellington and the other adults. "Thank you for this piano," he said calmly. "It's perfect." Mrs. Wellington's smile faltered for just a second. She had not expected him to say that. "You're very welcome," she said, but she did not sound as confident as before. As they left the room, Marcus heard one of the adults say, "Are you sure about this?" "What if he actually does well?" Mrs. Wellington laughed. "With that piano? Impossible. This will teach him where he belongs." Marcus pretended not to hear them, but their words made him more determined than ever. They thought they knew who he was and what he could do. They were wrong. The time for the competition finally arrived. Marcus changed into his good shirt in the small practice room. It was clean, but had been washed so many times that it felt thin and soft. He combed his hair with his fingers and took a deep breath. Outside, in the hallway, he could hear voices and footsteps. The main auditorium was filling up with people. Marcus peeked out of his room and saw families walking by. The parents wore expensive suits and jewelry. The students looked confident and relaxed, like they did this kind of thing all the time. A student assistant came to get Marcus. She was a girl about his age with shiny brown hair and a kind smile. Unlike the others, she did not look at him like he was different. "Hi, I'm Sarah," she said. "I'm here to help you get ready for your performance. Are you nervous?" "A little," Marcus admitted. "That's normal. Everyone gets nervous before they perform. Even the students who have been here for years." She walked with him toward the auditorium. "What piece are you playing?" "Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major," Marcus said. Sarah's eyes lit up. "That's a beautiful piece, and really difficult, too." "You must be very talented." Marcus felt a little better. At least one person here seemed nice. They reached the backstage area behind the auditorium. Marcus could hear the audience talking and laughing on the other side of the heavy curtains. His stomach felt like it was full of butterflies. The other competitors were warming up on practice keyboards. There were 12 students total, and Marcus was going to perform last. He watched the other kids getting ready. They all looked calm and prepared. Their parents stood nearby, giving them encouraging words and adjusting their fancy clothes. Marcus stood alone. He had no family there to support him. Mrs. Chun had wanted to come, but she had to work. She had wished him good luck that morning and told him she believed in him. Mrs. Wellington appeared with a clipboard in her hands. She was wearing an even fancier dress now, covered in sparkles that caught the light. "Attention, competitors," she announced. "The competition will begin in 5 minutes. Remember, you will be judged on technical skill, musical interpretation, and stage presence. The judges are all professional musicians and music teachers from the city's best schools." She looked directly at Marcus when she said the last part, and her fake smile returned. Marcus, dear, are you ready for your special performance? Some of the other students looked over at Marcus curiously. They had heard about the broken piano, but had not seen it yet. I'm ready, Marcus said quietly. Wonderful. I'm sure it will be quite a show. The curtains opened and Mrs. Wellington walked onto the stage. The auditorium was enormous and filled with hundreds of people. The stage lights were bright and hot. In the center of the stage sat a beautiful grand piano that gleamed under the lights. Welcome to the annual Whitmore Academy Piano Competition, Mrs. Wellington announced to the audience. Today, 12 talented young musicians will compete for our grand prize scholarship. Let's give them all a warm welcome. The audience clapped. Politely, Marcus peeked through the curtains and saw all the well-dressed people sitting in comfortable seats. He spotted some judges at a special table near the front. They looked very serious and important. The first student walked onto the stage. His name was Christopher, and he was wearing a black suit that looked like it cost more than Marcus had ever owned. He sat at the beautiful grand piano and began to play a complicated piece by Bach. Christopher played perfectly. Every note was exactly right, and his fingers moved across the keys like dancing. When he finished, the audience clapped loudly and the judges wrote notes on their papers. One by one, the other students performed. They all played difficult pieces and they all sounded amazing. The audience loved every performance. Marcus began to worry that he was not good enough to compete with these talented kids. A girl named Victoria played a piece by Mozart that sounded like angels singing. A boy named Alexander played something by Beethoven that was so powerful it gave Marcus goosebumps. Each performance seemed better than the last. Marcus was starting to feel sick to his stomach. These students had been taking lessons since they were very young. They had beautiful pianos at home to practice on. They had expensive teachers and perfect instruments. How could he possibly compete? Finally, it was Marcus's turn. Mrs. Wellington walked back onto the stage with her biggest fake smile yet. And now for our final performer of the evening, please welcome Marcus Thompson. The audience clapped, but not as loudly as they had for the other students. Marcus walked onto the stage and immediately felt the heat from the bright lights. The auditorium looked even bigger from up there, full of faces staring at him. Then he saw the piano. The stage crew was wheeling out the same broken piano from the practice room. Under the bright stage lights, it looked even worse than before. The missing keys were clearly visible to everyone. The cracked wood and wobbly bench looked completely out of place on the elegant stage. A shocked silence fell over the auditorium. People began to whisper to each other. Some pointed at the broken piano in disbelief. The judges looked confused and started talking among themselves. Marcus felt his face turn red. Everyone was staring at him and the awful piano. He could hear people in the audience starting to laugh. Some students backstage were giggling and taking pictures with their phones. Mrs. Wellington spoke into her microphone. Marcus will be performing on this very special vintage piano. It has quite a bit of character, as you can see. More laughter came from the audience. Marcus wanted to run away and hide, but his feet would not move. He stood frozen on the stage. Looking at the broken piano that was supposed to be his instrument, one of the judges stood up and walked over to Mrs. Wellington. Marcus could not hear what they were saying, but the judge looked angry. Mrs. Wellington kept smiling and nodding. But the judge shook his head and pointed at the piano. After a few minutes, Mrs. Wellington returned to her microphone. The judges have decided that Marcus may use this piano for his performance. We believe it will be a very unique and memorable experience for everyone. The judge who had spoken to her sat back down, but he did not look happy. He kept shaking his head and writing something on his paper. Marcus walked slowly to the broken piano. Every step felt like it took forever. The audience was still whispering and pointing. He could feel hundreds of eyes watching him. He sat down on the wobbly bench and placed his hands on the keys. Some of the keys felt loose under his fingers. He knew that several notes would not work at all, and others would sound terrible. Marcus closed his eyes and thought about why he was here. This was his chance to change his life. These people wanted him to fail, but he did not have to let them win. He had been practicing on this broken piano for hours. He knew how to work with it now. He opened his eyes and looked out at the audience. All those rich, well-dressed people expected him to embarrass himself. They thought this would be funny. But Marcus had something they did not understand. He had music in his heart that could not be broken by a broken piano. Marcus placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. The first notes that came from the broken piano were awful. They sounded like someone was strangling a cat. The audience immediately started laughing louder. Marcus heard someone say, "This is ridiculous." Another person said, "Who let this happen?" But Marcus did not stop playing. He had expected the piano to sound terrible, so he was ready for it. He had spent hours learning which keys worked and which ones did not. He had figured out how to make music even with this broken instrument. As he continued playing, something amazing started to happen. Marcus began to work around the broken keys. When a note would not play, he found another note that would. When a key sounded wrong, he made it part of the music somehow. He was not just playing the piano anymore, he was having a conversation. With it, the laughter in the audience slowly began to fade. People stopped whispering and started listening. Marcus was creating something beautiful. Even with the worst piano anyone had ever seen, he closed his eyes and let the music flow through him. He thought about all the nights he had spent alone in foster homes, wishing for a family. He thought about the community center where he first learned to play, and how music had saved him from feeling completely lost in the world. The broken piano seemed to understand his story. Every cracked key and missing note became part of the song he was telling. It was not perfect music, but it was real music. It was honest music that came from a place of pain and hope mixed together. As Marcus played, the audience became completely silent. The judges leaned forward in their seats, listening carefully to every note. Even Mrs. Wellington stopped smiling. Her fake smile and just watched with her mouth slightly open. Marcus reached the middle section of the Chopin piece, where the melody becomes very soft and tender. On a normal piano, this part would sound like a gentle whisper. On the broken piano, it sounded like someone crying quietly. But still finding beauty in their tears, a woman in the front row started crying real tears. She had probably never heard anything like this before. Music that came from struggle and hardship, but still reached for something beautiful. The broken keys forced Marcus to be creative. He played notes that were not in the original piece, but they fit perfectly with what he was feeling. He turned the missing keys into pauses that made the music even more powerful. Every flaw in the piano became a strength in his performance. Behind the curtains, the other students had stopped laughing. They were all watching through the small gaps in the curtains, amazed by what they were hearing. Christopher, who had played so perfectly earlier, whispered to Victoria, "I could never do that. I would not know how to make that piano sound like anything." Sarah, the kind student assistant who had helped Marcus earlier, had tears in her eyes. She knew she was watching something special happen. As Marcus moved into the final section of the piece, his playing became even more passionate. He was not just performing anymore. He was pouring his whole life story into the music. Every lonely night, every time he had been moved to a new home, every dream he had about having a real family someday, it all came through his fingers and into the music. The broken piano responded to his emotion. Even the worst-sounding keys seemed to find their voices. The instrument that was meant to humiliate him was helping him tell his story in a way that no perfect piano ever could. One of the judges, an elderly man who had been teaching music for 40 years, felt chills running down his spine. He had heard thousands of students play over the years, but he had never heard anything like this. This young man was making music with his soul, not just his fingers. Marcus reached the final notes of the piece. In the original version, the ending is gentle and peaceful. But on the broken piano, Marcus created an ending that was both heartbreaking and hopeful at the same time. The last note hung in the air for what felt like forever. When the music stopped, the entire auditorium was completely silent. No one moved. No one breathed. It was like the whole world had stopped to listen to what Marcus had just shared with them. Then, slowly, one person started clapping. It was the elderly judge who had felt the chills. His clapping was slow and respectful, like he was in church. Then another person joined in, and another. Soon, the entire audience was on their feet, clapping louder than they had clapped for anyone else that night. Marcus opened his eyes and looked out at the audience. He could not believe what he was seeing. All these rich, fancy people were standing, up and clapping for him. Some of them were crying. The judges were writing furiously on their papers. Mrs. Wellington looked shocked and confused. This was not what she had planned. She had wanted Marcus to fail and be embarrassed. Instead, he had just given the most powerful performance of the entire competition. Marcus stood up from the wobbly bench and took a small bow. The applause got even louder. Someone in the back of the auditorium shouted, "Bravo!" Others joined in calling out words of praise and encouragement. As Marcus walked off the stage, the other competitors were waiting for him backstage. Instead of making fun of him like they had before, they looked at him with respect and amazement. Christopher came up to him first. "That was incredible," he said. "I have been taking piano lessons since I was 4 years old, and I could never have done what you just did." Victoria nodded in agreement. "You made that broken piano sound like it was telling a story. How did you do that?" Marcus felt overwhelmed by their kindness. These students who had seemed so perfect and untouchable were now treating him like an equal, maybe even more than an equal. "I just played what I felt," Marcus said quietly. Sarah came over and gave him a hug. "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard," she said. "You should be very proud of yourself." Back in the auditorium, the judges were having an intense discussion. Mrs. Wellington kept trying to interrupt them, but they ignored her. The elderly judge was speaking passionately, using his hands to make his points. The other judges were nodding and looking at their notes. After about 10 minutes, Mrs. Wellington returned to the stage with her microphone. Her fake smile was gone now, replaced by a tight, uncomfortable expression. "Ladies and gentlemen, the judges have made their decision. This year's winner of the Whitmore Academy Piano Competition Scholarship is ... She paused for a very long time, like the words were hard for her to say, "Marcus Thompson." The audience exploded in cheers and applause. People jumped to their feet. Again, clapping and shouting. The elderly judge stood up and started clapping too. With a huge smile on his face, Marcus could not believe what he was hearing. He had won. Despite the broken piano, despite all the people who wanted him to fail, despite everything being stacked against him, he had won. The other students backstage were clapping for him too. Even though they had all lost, they seemed genuinely happy. For Marcus, they understood that what he had done was special and deserved to be recognized. Mrs. Wellington called Marcus back onto the stage to receive his award. As he walked out under the bright lights again, the applause was deafening. The elderly judge met him in the center of the stage and shook his hand warmly. "Young man," the judge said, speaking into Mrs. Wellington's microphone, "in 40 years of judging music competitions, I have never heard anything like what you just did. You did not just play music tonight, you created magic." The elderly judge continued speaking to the audience while Marcus stood beside him, still not quite believing what was happening. "What we witnessed tonight was not just technical skill," the judge said. "It was pure artistry. This young man took an instrument that was broken and turned it into something beautiful. He showed us that music is not about having perfect tools. It is about having a perfect heart." The audience clapped even louder. Marcus saw people wiping tears from their eyes. In the front row, a wealthy businessman was crying openly. His wife was holding his hand and crying too. Mrs. Wellington stood off to the side, holding the scholarship certificate. Her face was red and she looked very uncomfortable. She had never expected this to happen. Her plan to humiliate Marcus had completely backfired. The elderly judge took the certificate from Mrs. Wellington and handed it to Marcus personally. "This scholarship will pay for your entire music education at any college you choose," he said. "But more than that, you have a gift that cannot be taught. Never lose that." Marcus held the certificate in his shaking hands. He had dreamed of this moment for so long, but he had never really believed it could happen. Now here he was, standing on the stage of the fanciest school he had ever seen, holding his future in his hands. Thank you, Marcus said into the microphone. His voice was quiet, but everyone heard him. I want to thank everyone who believed in me, even when things looked impossible. He looked directly at Mrs. Wellington when he said this. She looked away quickly. And I want to thank this piano, Marcus said, walking over to the broken instrument. It taught me that being broken does not mean you cannot make beautiful music. Sometimes being broken is what makes the music real. The audience rose to their feet again. The applause was thunderous and went on for several minutes. Marcus stood on the stage, overwhelmed by the love and support he was feeling from these strangers. After the ceremony ended, many people came up to talk to Marcus. The businessman who had been crying introduced himself as Mr. Rodriguez. He owned several music stores in the city. Son, I want to offer you a job, Mr. Rodriguez said. You can work in one of my stores on weekends, and you can practice on any piano you want. You have something special, and I want to help you develop it. A woman who taught at the city's conservatory gave Marcus her business card. Call me next week, she said. I want to give you free piano lessons until you start college. What you did tonight was extraordinary. Even some of the other students and their families came over to congratulate Marcus. Christopher's parents shook his hand and told him they were honored to have heard him play. Victoria asked if she could be his friend and maybe learn from him. But the most surprising person to approach Marcus was Mrs. Wellington herself. She waited until most of the crowd had left, then walked over to where he was standing with Mrs. Chung, who had arrived just as the competition was ending. Marcus, Mrs. Wellington said, and for the first time all day her voice sounded real instead of fake. I owe you an apology. Marcus looked at her, surprised. He had not expected this. What I did tonight was wrong, she continued. I gave you that broken piano because I thought you did not belong here. I thought you would embarrass yourself and everyone would see that some people just are not meant for places like this. Her voice was shaking a little. But you proved me completely wrong. You showed everyone in that auditorium tonight what real music sounds like. You made me realize that I have been teaching piano for 20 years, but I had forgotten what music is really about. Mrs. Wellington reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver key. This is the key to our best practice room. It has a concert grand piano that is worth more than most people's houses. I want you to have access to it whenever you want for as long as you want. Marcus took the key, not knowing what to say. This woman who had tried to humiliate him was now giving him access to the best piano in the school. Why? He asked. Because you deserve it, Mrs. Wellington said simply. And because I hope someday I can learn to teach music the way you play it with your whole heart. Over the next few weeks, Marcus's life changed completely. The story of his performance spread throughout the city. A local newspaper wrote an article about him with the headline, Foster Kid Turns Broken Piano into Beautiful Music. The article talked about his talent and his scholarship, but also about the importance of giving all children opportunities to succeed. A video of his performance was posted online and went viral. Millions of people around the world watched Marcus play the broken piano. Comments poured in from musicians, teachers, and regular people who were moved by his story. Several famous pianists reached out to Marcus through social media. One offered to mentor him when he started college. Another invited him to perform at a concert in New York City, but the most important change was that Marcus finally felt like he belonged somewhere. The other students at Whitmore Academy welcomed him warmly. He made real friends for the first time in his life. Teachers at the school offered to help him with his other subjects so he would be ready for college. Mrs. Chun was so proud she could barely contain herself. She had always believed in Marcus, but even she had not expected things to turn out this well. She helped him apply to several prestigious music schools, and with his scholarship, he would be able to attend any of them. Marcus spent many hours in the fancy practice room playing the beautiful concert grand piano. But sometimes he would go back to the small room with the broken piano. He had grown attached to that old instrument. It had taught him that making music was not about having perfect conditions. It was about finding beauty even when things were difficult. The broken piano was eventually repaired and placed in a place of honor in the school's music wing. A small plaque next to it read, "This piano reminds us that music comes from the heart, not from perfect instruments." One day, about a month after the competition, Marcus was practicing in his special room when Sarah knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said with a big smile. Marcus walked to the main office and found an older couple waiting for him. They looked nervous but kind. "Marcus," Mrs. Chun said, "I would like you to meet Mr. and Mrs. Patterson. They heard your story and, well, they would like to talk to you about something important." Mrs. Patterson stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "Marcus, we have been trying to adopt an older child for a long time. Most families want babies, but we specifically wanted to help a teenager who needed a family. When we heard your story and saw your performance, we knew you were the young man we had been looking for." Marcus felt his heart stop beating for a moment. "You want to adopt me?" Mr. Patterson nodded. "We know you are almost 18 and will be going to college soon, but we thought maybe you would like to have a family to come home to during breaks. We have a piano at our house and we would love to hear you play every day." Marcus could not speak. He had dreamed of having a real family his entire life, but he had given up hope that it would ever happen. Now, because of that broken piano and his willingness to never give up, everything he had ever wanted was coming true. 6 months later, Marcus started his freshman year at the most prestigious music school in the country. He lived in the dorms during the week, but went home to the Patterson house every weekend. For the first time in his life, he had parents who loved him and believed in him. He continued to practice on both perfect pianos and broken ones. He never forgot the lesson that the old piano at Whitmore Academy had taught him, that real music comes from overcoming obstacles, not from avoiding them. Marcus graduated at the top of his class and became a famous pianist who performed in concert halls around the world. But he also became something more important. He became a teacher who worked with children from difficult backgrounds, showing them that music could change their lives just like it had changed his dot. And sometimes, when he gave concerts, Marcus would tell the story of the broken piano and the night that changed everything. He would remind his audiences that being broken does not mean you cannot create something beautiful. Sometimes being broken is exactly what makes the beauty possible. Years later, Marcus returned to Whitmore Academy to give a special concert. The auditorium was packed with students, teachers, and community members. At the end of his performance on the beautiful grand piano, Marcus surprised everyone by having the old broken piano wheeled onto the stage. He sat down at the instrument that had started it all and played the same Chopin piece he had played that night so long ago. The broken keys still did not work perfectly, but Marcus made them sing anyway. When he finished, the audience gave him the longest standing ovation in the school's history. But Marcus was not thinking about the applause. He was thinking about a scared foster kid who had been given a broken piano as a cruel joke, and how that broken piano had actually been the greatest gift anyone had ever given him. Because sometimes the things that are meant to break us are actually the things that make us whole. 10 years had passed since that life-changing night at the academy. The young man who once wore worn-out sneakers and carried his only good shirt in a backpack now stood backstage at Carnegie Hall in New York City. He adjusted his black tuxedo and looked at himself in the mirror. Sometimes he still could not believe how far he had come. Tonight was special. He was not just performing for wealthy music lovers in fancy clothes. Tonight, he was performing for kids just like he used to be. The concert was a fundraiser for foster children who wanted to learn music but could not afford instruments or lessons. He walked to the window and looked out at the busy street below. Yellow taxis honked their horns and people hurried along the sidewalks. Somewhere in this big city there were probably kids sitting in group homes, dreaming of something better. He remembered being one of those kids. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. His manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, peeked her head in. 5 minutes until showtime, she said with a warm smile. The hall is completely sold out. There are even people standing in the back. He nodded and took a deep breath. Even after all these years of performing, he still got nervous before big concerts. But it was a good kind of nervous, the kind that made him play better. "Oh, and there's someone here to see you," Mrs. Rodriguez added. She says she's from your old school. The pianist's heart skipped a beat. Could it be someone from Whitmore Academy? He had not been back there in several years, though he still sent them money every Christmas to help kids who could not afford. Music lessons. Mrs. Rodriguez stepped aside, and in walked a young woman with curly hair and a nervous smile. She looked familiar, but he could not quite place her. "Hi," she said quietly. "I don't know if you remember me. I was a student assistant at the academy the night you won the competition. I helped you get ready backstage." Now he remembered. She was the kind girl who had been nice to him when everyone else was laughing. She had told him that everyone gets nervous, even students who had been there for years. "Of course I remember you," he said, shaking her hand. "You were one of the few people who was kind to me that night. What brings you here?" Her face lit up. "I'm a music teacher now. I work at a school in Brooklyn with kids who come from difficult situations. When I heard about tonight's concert, I had to come and see you perform again." She paused and looked down at her hands. "That night at the academy changed my life too. Watching you play that broken piano made me realize what music education should really be about. It's not about having perfect instruments or expensive lessons. It's about helping kids find their voices and believe in themselves." The pianist felt a warm feeling in his chest. He had always wondered if that night had affected other people the way it had affected him. "I brought some of my students with me tonight," she continued. "They're sitting in the audience right now. Most of them have never been to a concert like this before. Some of them are in foster care, just like you were. I told them your story and they wanted to hear you play." This news made him even more nervous and excited at the same time. Playing for critics and wealthy donors was one thing. Playing for kids who really understood struggle was something completely different. "Would you like to meet them after the concert?" she asked hopefully. "I would love that," he said without hesitation. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway again. "It's time," she said. The pianist walked toward the stage, but then stopped and turned back to the teacher. "What's your name?" he asked. "I feel terrible that I never knew it all those years ago." "It's Rachel," she said with a smile. "And don't feel terrible. You had a lot on your mind that night." He walked onto the stage of Carnegie Hall and was immediately hit by the bright lights and the sound of applause. The audience was huge, much bigger than the one at the Academy that night long ago. But as he sat down at the beautiful grand piano, he thought about those kids from Brooklyn, sitting somewhere in the crowd. He began his performance with a piece by Beethoven that told a story of triumph over adversity. As his fingers moved across the keys, he thought about his journey. The group homes, the broken piano, the cruel joke that had turned into the best thing that ever happened to him. The music flowed through him like it always did, but tonight it felt extra powerful. He was not just playing for himself anymore. He was playing for every kid who had ever felt different, unwanted, or not good enough after the Beethoven. He played the same Chopin piece he had performed that night at the Academy. But this time, the piano was perfect. Every key worked exactly as it should. The sound was rich and beautiful, filling every corner of the great hall. As he played, he could almost hear the broken piano from that night so long ago. He remembered how he had to work around the missing keys and the awful sounds. That struggle had taught him something valuable about making music and about life. Sometimes the obstacles are what make you stronger. When he finished the Chopin, the audience erupted in applause. He stood and took a bow, but then he did something unexpected. He sat back down at the piano and began to speak into the microphone that had been set up for him. "Tonight is very special for me," he said. 10 years ago, I was a foster kid who had nothing but a dream and a love for music. I was given a broken piano as a cruel joke, but that broken piano taught me the most important lesson of my life. The audience became very quiet, listening to every word. "It taught me that you don't need perfect conditions to create something beautiful. You don't need expensive instruments or fancy clothes or rich parents. You just need heart, determination, and the willingness to never give up." He looked out into the audience, trying to spot the kids from Brooklyn. "There are young people here tonight who might be facing their own broken pianos. Maybe you feel like the world is stacked against you. Maybe you think you don't belong in places like this. I want you to know that you do belong here. Your voice matters, your dreams matter. The applause was immediate and thunderous. People jumped to their feet, some with tears in their eyes. In the balcony section, he could see a group of kids clapping enthusiastically. Those must be Rachel's students. After the concert ended, he met with Rachel and her students backstage. There were 12 kids, ranging in age from 10 to 17. Some looked shy and overwhelmed by being in such a fancy place. Others looked tough, like they had learned to protect themselves from disappointment. One girl, maybe 14 years old, raised her hand like she was in school. "Yes," he said with a smile. "Is it true that you really played on a broken piano?" She asked. "It is true. Would you like to see it?" The kids looked confused. How could they see a piano from 10 years ago? He made a phone call, and 20 minutes later, a truck pulled up outside Carnegie Hall. The delivery men carefully wheeled in the same old broken piano from Whitmore Academy. The school had agreed to loan it to him for special occasions like this. The kids gathered around the piano in amazement. It still looked terrible. The missing keys were obvious, and the wood was still cracked and faded. "This is it," he said, sitting down on the familiar wobbly bench. "This is the piano that changed my life." He began to play the Chopin piece again, at this time on the broken instrument. The sound was just as awful as it had been that night, but somehow it was also beautiful. The kids listened in wonder as he made music with an instrument that barely worked. When he finished, one of the boys spoke up. "That was amazing. How did you learn to do that?" "Practice," he said simply, "and refusing to give up when things got hard." Another girl asked, "Do you still practice on broken pianos?" He laughed. "Sometimes. It keeps me humble and reminds me where I came from. But more importantly, it reminds me that music is not about the instrument. It's about what's in here." He pointed to his heart. Rachel stepped forward. "Tell them about your foundation." She said he had started a foundation 3 years earlier that provided free music lessons and instruments to kids who could not afford them. They had helped over 1,000 children so far, and many of them had gone on to win scholarships and pursue music careers. "We give kids instruments and lessons," he explained. "But we also give them something more important. We give them hope. We show them that their circumstances don't have to define their futures." One of the older boys looked skeptical. "But what? If we're not good enough? What if we practice and still can't play like you?" This was a question he heard often, and it always broke his heart a little. "Let me tell you something," he said, looking directly at the boy. "Being good enough is not about playing perfectly. It's about expressing yourself honestly. Some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard came from people who made mistakes but played with passion." He sat back down at the broken piano. "This piano taught me that perfection is overrated. What matters is authenticity. What matters is heart." As the evening wound down, each of the kids came up to shake his hand and thank him. Many of them asked for his autograph, which still felt strange to him. He was just a kid from foster care who had gotten lucky. The last girl in line was very quiet. She looked about 12 years old and had sad eyes that reminded him of himself at that age. "Thank you," she whispered. "What's your name?" he asked gently.